This is the Turret Incarnon, probably the best group clearer in the entirety of Warframe. And this is the Kuva Nukor, a little pistol mostly used for status priming and definitely not a crit beast like the turret, right? Well, I think we got something to talk about here. In fact, the Kuva Nukor changed a lot with the release of Warframe 1999, and we're gonna go over all of that here today. As always, big shout out to all our generous channel members. Follow me on Twitch, link in the description, and with all that being said, let's take a look at the Kuva Nukor in 2025. Alright, let's first talk about what the Kuva Nukor is and how it works, but I want to keep this one a bit shorter because there's quite a bit of build theory coming up, so let's not waste any time here. The Kuva Nukor is a beam pistol with a base range of 29 meters, which should be enough for most content in the game. It has a very high fire rate, the highest crit damage multiplier of all weapons in the entirety of Warframe, and whenever you hit an enemy, you create arcing beams that jump over to nearby enemies so you can hit multiple enemies at the same time. In terms of status chance, we have an insane 50%, however, and this is the big caveat for this weapon, even though it has the highest crit damage multiplier in the entire game, it only comes with a measly 7% base crit chance, so by default, you're not gonna see any meaningful crit performance. Don't worry though, we're gonna talk more about that in a minute. In terms of damage, the Kuva Nukor has innate radiation, and due to the fact that it is a Kuva weapon, that means it will automatically come with another element as a progenitor as soon as you generate it, giving it always at least 2 different elements. However, there is one more very special feature with the Kuva Nukor, and that would be a unique status effect called Microwave. Microwave is a status effect where when you hit an enemy body part, that body part physically grows. Just by itself, that's not really all that great, but this microwave status effect, even though it doesn't show up next to the enemy's name, is considered as a normal status effect by the game, so for the purpose of status priming or stuff like Manifold Bond, that means that by default with its 2 innate elements plus the microwave, the Kuva Nukor will already start out dealing at least always 3 different status effects. But now that we're already talking about elements and different status effects, how about we jump right into the build section, because with the release of Warframe 1999, a lot has changed about the Kuva Nukor if you want to build it as optimally as possible. Alright, first of all, I want to go over the status primer build, and before you click away, with the release of Warframe 1999, there was a change on how to optimally build your priming Kuva Nukor, so let's go over it one more time together. As I'm sure everyone is aware, the whole goal of a status primer build is to apply as many different status effects to the enemy as possible with the Kuva Nukor, so that you can then use mods like Condition Overload or Galvanized Aptitude on your main damage dealing weapon to benefit from their effect and gain loads and loads of damage through all the added status effects. Now, in order to get as many different status effects as possible, beforehand, ideally for a status primer build, you would have liked a magnetic progenitor element on your Kuva Nukor, so that you could then mod Viral and Heat onto it, and by that get the maximum amount of different elements. However, with the release of Warframe 1999, we got the mod Magnetic Might. This, although it's just one single mod, adds magnetic damage without having to use cold and electricity to combine it, meaning we actually don't want a magnetic progenitor anymore because we're going to use magnetic might for the magnetic portion of the damage. Instead, what we want now for the perfect primer build is actually an impact progenitor. Yes, I know this sounds crazy, but let me elaborate for 1 second. The Kuva Nukor by default does not have any physical damage types. However, if we pick an impact progenitor, then we do get impact damage on it anyway. The reason we want to have impact here is the mod Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage makes it that for any impact proc that your weapon deals, you have a 35% chance of also getting a slash proc. This is usually meant to be used as the quote-unquote hunter munitions version of the pistol, but what it does here is you get another additional different element for free, that being slash. So to sum it up again one more time, with the release of Magnetic Might, we do not need a magnetic progenitor anymore because now it only takes 1 mod slot to get magnetic. This then frees the progenitor to be impact, which we can then turn into impact plus slash through the use of hemorrhage, so that with the new Kuva Nukor, we would have impact slash magnetic, radiation, viral, and heat all on the weapon at the same time. This right here would be the full build. I think so far nothing surprising. I gotta say though, we didn't go for sure shot because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to fit heat onto the weapon. But given the fact that a 60-60 heat mod versus sure shot is not that much of a loss in status chance and we have so much fire rate, I don't think anyone would really notice the difference. Of course, in the arcane slot, we go for secondary encumber, which is the objectively best arcane for a status primer build because it gives you even more random status effects. And in the Excellus slot, I would recommend going for pistol ammo mutation. I know there's also the mod that increases your beam length, but in most cases, I don't think you need extra range. And due to the fact that you don't have that big of an ammo maximum with the Kuva Nukor, in my opinion, pistol ammo mutation would be the way to go. And of course, as always, if you could maybe drop the video a like, that would be super nice of you because it helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. Okay, so much for the status primer build. I think in 2025 we're gonna have even more fun with that, but how about we now take a bit of a closer look on how we can turn the Kuva Nukor into an absolute damage dealing beast as teased in the intro. In today's video, I'm gonna show you 3 different versions of a damage dealing build. One focused on damage over time, one focused on blast, and the third one being a direct damage build that's just made to hit like a truck. And of course, for each and every one of them, we're gonna discuss which would be the best progenitor element as well. Now, in the past, the Kuva Nukor was already a relatively good damage dealer because of its incredible crit damage multiplier. However, in order to even crit enough to use it, we would have to either go for Arcane Avenger on our Warframe to give us flat crit chance, use Harrow with his 4th ability, or bring the Adarza Kavat as a companion, which was the 3rd and last option to also get flat crit chance. Needless to say, if you wanted to use the Kuva Nukor, you were kind of limited in how to play. With the release of Warframe 1999 though, this changed a lot. Now, we got a brand new pistol arcane called Secondary Enervate. What this does is, whenever you score a hit with your pistol, your crit chance increases by 10%. This 10% is also a flat increase, like the 45% from Arcane Avenger, so with an insane fire rate like the Kuva Nukor, this crit chance is gonna ramp up very quickly. However, there is also a caveat, because this crit chance buff resets after you score 6 big critical hits. In case you were wondering what a big critical hit is, I was also asking myself that. Big critical hits are apparently the official name of orange crits, so in other words, your crit chance will ramp up quickly, and once you're dealt 6 orange crits, it's gonna reset back down to 0 and then ramp up again. This arcane though is perfect for the Kuva Nukor because it gives it a source of flat crit chance, so we now don't have to go with Arcane Avenger, Harrow, or the Adarza Kavat anymore. That then naturally allows us to be as flexible with our Warframe and companion choice as we want. We can now use the Kuva Nukor on basically everything. But alright, on a damage dealing build, we always gotta use Secondary Enervate. Let's now though talk about the different build approaches, starting out with the damage over time build. Now, even though a lot of people think damage over time in Warframe is dead since the enemy health changes, I think that even though it's not as good as it was anymore, it's definitely still viable, especially on high status chance, high fire rate weapons like the Kuva Nukor. As a progenitor, we have 2 options here basically, either Toxin if you want to specifically use your Kuva Nukor against shielded Corpus units, or alternatively going for Heat because Heat is the only damage over time element in Warframe that can stack up infinitely and therefore would be the optimal choice for everything except Corpus here. As for the build itself, naturally when you go for damage over time, you want to have an Elementalist mod to ramp up that damage even more, as well as a faction damage one, and the rest is naturally self-explanatory. More damage, more multi-shot, more status chance, more crit damage, and so on and so forth. Let's next though talk about a different damage over time build, that being the Blast one. As we all know, Blast is the best element in Warframe against pretty much everything, as long as we can guarantee that a lot of enemies are tightly grouped together. So, if you want to go for Blast on the Kuva Nukor, make sure that whatever setup you're running has a decent bit of a grouping, otherwise your damage potential will be suffering quite a bit. As a progenitor for a blast build, the ideal way to go about it would be cold, because in order to get blast you need to combine heat and cold, and for pistols the heat mod heated charge does have a primed version, so it makes more sense to have cold as a progenitor on the Kuva Nukor to get the maximum blast damage possible. And funny enough, this blast build right here is exactly the same one as my heat damage over time build that I showcased before, only difference here being, of course, if you want to have a blast Kuva Nukor, you gotta combine this build with a cold progenitor like I just said. And finally, let's now talk about a build that is quite a bit different. That will be the direct damage build. Here, we don't go for damage over time, but instead for whatever element the faction that you're up against is weakest to. That's also why for a progenitor, I can't really give a definite answer. Use whatever you need to combine it into the combined element that you need for your target faction. For example, if you wanted to go up against Grineer or anything that is weak against corrosive, I would recommend a toxin progenitor because you can combine that with primed convulsion to also here get the maximum corrosive possible. Which is, by the way, exactly what I did in this build right here. This is the direct damage build, however there is one mod that is kind of optional, and that would be anemic agility, because whether you want to use it to amplify your fire rate even more or not is kind of up to you. You could also leave it out, have a lower fire rate and replace it with anything you like, maybe a toxin mod for even more corrosive, so it kind of comes down to your personal preference, but at the end of the day, I would say both is viable, more fire rate as well as more corrosive damage. By the way, this corrosive build is especially nice if you use green Archon shards on your Warframe, because it just melts away the armor of the enemy in a split second. And if you now want to have a detailed explanation on how to get your own Kuva Nukor, then check out my full Lich Hunting guide right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanio2, Pepper Wolf, Mihawky, Yagis, Hockey Hunter, Noob Phoenix, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.